This is the JLAT session on practicing justice. So to recap where we've got to so far, biblical justice is multifaceted. It's this multi-layered symphony of different instruments. It's a story that invites our participation. Now, in this last session, we've unpacked the key words that shape a biblical understanding of justice. And we've arrived at a working definition. We think in Just Love that the white-hot centre of justice in the way of Jesus comes in the dynamic interaction of compassion, resistance, and restoration. So, unpacking each of those in turn, compassion is about loving what is good. Compassion is this gut-level discomfort that aligns our emotions with God's burning passion for the full thriving of all his creatures, and God's holy outrage as well at injustice. Compassion is a heart posture of empathy that compels us towards solidarity, identifying with and sharing our lives with those who suffer. So that's compassion. Second, resistance. Resistance is about confronting what is wrong. It's a repulsion towards all that is evil, all that degrades the dignity and the value of image bearers. And it leads us to challenge unjust systems, social arrangements, and individuals, and, importantly, to repent of our own complicity. So that's resistance. Third, justice in the way of Jesus is about restoration. It's about making things right, aligning our effort and energy with God's mission to renew and repair all of creation, to put right all that is wrong. Hopefully, it's become really clear that all of these, compassion, resistance, restoration, index us towards a pursuit of justice that is fundamentally active. So in this final session, we're going to talk about putting justice into practice. I'm going to introduce you to the idea of integral mission, and then we'll bring together all of these sessions on the theology of justice by getting really practical. First of all then, integral mission. I hope another time, and we might have loads more space to talk in way more depth about integral mission. This is just a very quick introduction to kind of whet your appetite. And we have made the point already in these theology sessions that justice is a vital part of our worship and our discipleship. And I want to finish by making the case that it is also a vital part of mission. Now, the language of integral mission was coined by Latin American theologians like René Padilla in the 1970s and has widely been adopted across much of the global church. The idea is simple. Joining in with God's mission requires both evangelism and justice. And the Micah Declaration is a famous kind of declaration laying out the basic definition of integral mission. And it goes like this. It says, integral mission or holistic transformation is the proclamation and demonstration of the gospel. It's not simply that evangelism and social involvement are done alongside each other. Rather, in integral mission, our proclamation has social consequences as we call people to love and repentance in all areas of life. And our social involvement has evangelistic consequences as we bear witness to the transforming grace of Jesus Christ. The key thing there is that it is not just that these two, evangelism, social justice, are kind of good but mutually exclusive things to do. The key part of this definition is that evangelism is stronger when we do justice, and justice is stronger when we do evangelism. I'm sure many of us will have encountered Christians using the language of mission basically to exclusively mean evangelism, telling people the gospel. And it's important for me to say that evangelism really matters. Sharing the gospel is really important. Yeah, it can be done in ways that are coercive, arrogant, cringy, but when we begin to understand what God has done for us in Jesus, it's the most natural thing in the world to then want to share that good news with others. So evangelism is a vital part of joining in with God's mission. Please don't hear anything other than that. But what we want to say in Just Love is that integral mission claims justice too is a vital part of God's mission in the world. So let me give you 4 very quick reasons why justice is part of God's mission. First, Jesus always ministered to whole human beings. Hopefully, that's very clear through the whole series that we've covered in our training so far. There's loads more on this in our Justice in the Way of Jesus ebook as well. Think, for example, about the leper that Jesus meets in Luke 5. The leper meets Jesus, so there's something, the spiritual element there. He's healed, physical. And Jesus tells him to go to the priest because they're the ones who can determine him clean, which then allows him to re-enter society. So there's massive social and economic implications there too. And Jesus' mission was always to whole human beings. It was never about getting disembodied souls to an immaterial heaven. Jesus addresses whole human beings. He doesn't break us down into fragments. Second, the gospel is cosmic. The gospel is the announcement that Jesus, Israel's Messiah, is king over all creation. It is the gospel of the kingdom, and it is cosmic. So it absolutely involves me making a decision to accept Jesus as my Lord and Savior. But it is also good news because it is about God making right the broken relationships I have with others and the broken systems that oppress and dehumanize and destroy. If the mission of God is about this cosmic mission, God making right all that is wrong, that it involves both evangelism and justice. Third reason, the story ends with new creation. Now, our hope is not for disembodied souls being evacuated from earth and going to heaven when we die. That is not Christian hope. That idea has infiltrated popular culture from Plato, from some kind of Eastern philosophy, from American fundamentalism, not from the Bible. When you read Isaiah or Romans 8 or 1 Corinthians 15 or Revelation 21 and 22, the story does not end with believers being evacuated from an earth doomed to destruction. It ends with God's homecoming, with what Jesus calls the renewal of all things in Matthew 19. The resurrection of the dead, the reunion of heaven and earth, the destruction of death, the end of all injustice and suffering, the new Jerusalem, God dwelling with his people. When we practice justice, we point forward to God's ultimate future. And the fourth reason why I'm convinced by integral mission is integrity. The primary way that most people will have the gospel interpreted to them is probably not going to be through a sermon. It's going to be through their interaction with Christians. And there is little, I think, that undermines the witness of the gospel like hypocrisy. So when people see Christians who preach about a God of love, but then are complicit in injustice, or not even complicit, but just apathetic about injustice, is it any surprise that those people end up pretty skeptical? Seeking justice is a matter of integrity. Without it, we're just empty words. People should look at our life together as followers of Jesus and see beauty and hope and self-giving love and reconciliation that are radically different from anything the world offers. That would be intriguing, if only that were true. Now, when we remove justice from mission, we lose integrity. We massively undermine the mission. So, integral mission, justice and evangelism together. One of the best summaries of this comes from René Padilla. He says that the proclamation of the gospel and the demonstration of the gospel, in other words, saying it and living it out, that gives itself in service, form an indissoluble whole. One without the other is an incomplete, mutilated gospel, and consequently, contrary to the will of God. From this perspective, it is foolish to ask about the relative importance of evangelism or social responsibility. This would be equivalent to asking about the relative importance of the right wing or the left wing of a plane. Do you get that? He's saying the moment we start saying, oh, should we be doing justice because maybe that takes time away from evangelism or takes focus away from evangelism, we have missed the point, says René Padilla. We have missed the point. That is a bit like saying, is the left wing or the right wing of the plane more important? You have to have both. They don't work separately. Another analogy would be salt, sodium chloride. You know, on their own, sodium, chlorine, quite dangerous elements, I think, certainly not very tasty. Together, that's where the magic happens. You get salt. That's integral mission. Justice and evangelism together. My hope is that all of us will be praying for and looking for opportunities to share the gospel in our lives in the year ahead, in the rest of our lives. And Christian student culture resources evangelism pretty well. Churches, CUs, Christians in sport, etc. But the same is not true, by and large, for Justice. We tend to have a very weak Justice discipleship in UK Christian church, especially in places like university. That's where Just Love comes in. We want to make sure that justice is not treated as some sort of optional extra, but as a vital part of the mission that God has given his church. So together we want to practice justice, and we want to do it in a way that invites others to join us. Now, we use that word practice deliberately. We practice justice the same way that you might practice an instrument or a sport or a foreign language or a trade. You can't just learn the piano or basketball or German or carpentry by reading a book. You learn with a lifetime of faithfully showing up and doing the stuff, getting in the reps. Now, seeking justice in the way of Jesus is an invitation into a lifetime of showing up to active, embodied practice. So, how do we practice? Well, fundamentally, we've got to do it together. Practicing justice in the way of Jesus doesn't work in isolation. We need community. We need to do it together. The 6 practices that we have developed in Just Love, our justice practices, give us a framework for pursuing justice. These are lifelong practices. Now, there's going to be limitations on what each of these look like while you are a student. But equally, you can't move from 1 to 100 in any of these practices in one go, probably. These are decisions and commitments. And there are commitments you can make in each of these 6 practices in the year ahead that will have a real, immediate impact in the world, and which will begin shaping you into the sort of person who's going to be capable of going really deep with these practices over the rest of your life. So, just to take them one by one. First, we've got serve humbly. This is about how you use your time, your energy, your skills in the year ahead. How are you using it to serve others? And we'll cover this more in the volunteering seminar later in our training. But there might be no more important thing that you do in the year ahead than serving your local city. We will encounter justice in the way of Jesus far more in the glamorous work of befriending those on the margins in our neighborhood than we ever will sitting around a table, sipping oat lattes and talking about justice. So that's serving humbly. Living lightly, this is actually one where you can go deep right away. And what would it look like in your Just Love groups, in your church communities, to resist consumerism and materialism, to live simply in the year ahead? And you can have a huge impact if you got everyone in your Just Love community to switch to a renewable energy tariff, or you helped your church to move to an ethical bank, or you reduce flying and meat consumption. The cumulative weight of that would be massive. Nothing stopping you. Give deeply. What would it look like for you in the year ahead to live as though money is not ours to hoard, but a gift given to share? What would it look like to cultivate radical generosity? What if small groups of you committed to decisions like capping your income, living off a modest amount and giving the rest away for the rest of your lives? That might not have a huge impact right now, but over a lifetime, that could mean millions of pounds given away. There's nothing stopping you in the year ahead making those sorts of commitments. That can totally happen. Love widely. How can we shape ourselves into the sorts of people for whom radical hospitality, welcoming the excluded into family, is just second nature? It's tempting for this to feel a bit like something for the future, maybe when you have a house and a family or a reliable income, whatever. But how can you train the muscle memory now? If you're interested, for example, in fostering or adopting in the future, then who are the foster or adoptive families in your church right now that you can wrap around and support? If you're interested in living in intentional community in the future, how can you be orienting your life around loving others sacrificially right now? Changing structures. If we want to see big change in our lifetime, if we want to build institutions that serve the common good, then you could start by getting involved with some meaningful campaigns in the year ahead. It could be really local, it could be national. And speak to your member of staff. They can help connect you. And finally, pray boldly. Again, This is one where actually being a student really doesn't limit you at all. What would it look like in your Just Love groups to be furnaces of intercession this year? What if we were forming the sorts of disciples who lament and grieve and cry out to God for all that is wrong, who pray down dictators, who intercede for peace, who travail in prayer for God's will to be done on earth as in heaven? What if that was the centering point of your Just Love group? What if we were known as the people who really prayed? So pause the video if you're watching. We'll have more space for this later, but just while it's fresh, write down maybe 1-2 areas from those 6 practices where you want to take a next step in practicing justice right away. Not maybe sometime in the future, but right away. What could you do right now to take a next step? Okay. The 6 practices give us a framework for practicing justice. But one key thing that I want you to take away from these 4 theology sessions that you're always done with, well done, and from reading the ebook as well, is that the way we do justice matters just as much as what we do. In other words, how we do it matters as much as what. To pursue justice in the way of Jesus is about staying true to our story. It's about pointing back to the cross and pointing forwards to new creation. So as we push deeper together into living out those 6 practices in the year ahead, let's give real care, not just to what we practice, but to how we practice. And so, to bring all of this together, let me give you 8 quick starting points for how we pursue justice together. First of all, pursuing justice is a posture, not a gesture. Biblical justice is not a box that we tick. It is an invitation that we orient our whole lives around. Second, solidarity, not distance. Rejecting sort of patronizing and pity, and instead embracing the vulnerability of being with those on the margins, of building genuine 2-directional friendships, of making their concerns our concerns. Solidarity, not distance. Third, community, not isolation. We cannot do this alone. We desperately need each other. One of the most vital things you can do in the year ahead is to build the sorts of deep friendships with others on this journey alongside you that will sustain you and keep you going for the rest of your lives when things get hard. Fourth, pursuing justice in the way of Jesus is about peacemaking, not polarizing. In a culture of heightening fracture, division, culture wars, and polarization, our pursuit of justice will require the hard task of peacemaking. That means resisting the pressure to align ourselves fully with any secular ideology, left or right or centrist, whatever it is, and instead we place our allegiance in the politics of Jesus, which will never fit neatly into an ideological box. We commit ourselves to the work of reconciliation, but we must never mistake peacemaking with passivity. Being a peacemaker is not about sitting out conflicts. It's about entering into the midst of conflict with the merciful, redemptive love of Jesus. Insisting on the image-bearing value of every person involved, and doing the hard work of finding real, workable, non-violent solutions to great problems. Next, pursuing justice in the way of Jesus is about hiddenness, not celebrity. And most of what it takes to practice justice in the way of Jesus will often feel a bit dull or unspectacular. If we want our pursuit of justice to be a sort of highlight reel of Instagram-worthy moments, we will be disappointed. Some of us may find ourselves in positions of real influence at some point in our lives. That will be the minority. And even if that is the case, we need to become the sorts of people who can be trusted to hold power for the common good and not for our own benefit. And we become those sorts of people by embracing the unseen, glamourless work of loving our neighbor, of showing up when we'd rather be watching Netflix, of orienting our prayers, finances, and consumption towards the well-being of others. Next, pursuing justice in the way of Jesus is about creativity, not conformity. In a world that is unraveling, the need is for the sort of creative thinking that will dare to reimagine what is possible. How do we incubate and pioneer new ideas and new solutions? How do we create an entrepreneurial culture in our groups where we don't just play it safe, but where we're brave enough to take some risks, try new things, even if a lot of them fail? Next, devotion, not duty. We're back to the idea of invitation. We love God when we love others. This is not about guilt or shame or duty. Pursuing justice in the way of Jesus is about becoming who we were made to be. It is a delight. And then finally, pursuing justice in the way of Jesus is about hope, not despair. In a culture that frankly feels increasingly bleak, our pursuit of justice is energized by the hope of new creation, the hope that what God did in Jesus is what God will do for the entire creation. That darkness and evil and injustice will not get the last word. The Lamb is going to win. Fleming Rutledge puts it beautifully. She says that to be a Christian is to live every day of our lives in solidarity with those who sit in darkness and in the shadow of death, but to live with the unshakable hope of those who expect the dawn. There we go. Well done. We're at the end of our 4 big sessions on the theology of justice. If we want to become the sorts of women and men who can pursue justice in the way of Jesus holistically, fruitfully, and sustainably over our lifetimes, we need to be deeply committed to each other in community. We need to immerse ourselves in the biblical story of justice in order for it to reshape our imagination. And perhaps most importantly of all, we need to practice justice. That's how we train ourselves to be people of love.